Hi, my name is Dr. Jason Pierce. I'm a professor of history at the Dr. Arnaldo de Leon Department of History here at Angelo State University. I'm a member of the core team for the San Angelo NAACP Buffalo Soldier Memorial, and I've been there since the start when the planning of the project was starting to happen. It's something that I think is long overdue, and I think the core team and Ms. Shirley Spears have put together a really good proposal and something that I think will be of great benefit to the community that fits well in with the surrounding environs, especially Fort Concho. And so I think this is, it's going to be a kind of a game changer for San Angelo in general, and a real nice addition to the cultural district, the area around the fort, the Paseo, the art museum. And so this is a nice addition to that, and it's an important addition, I think, as well, because the Buffalo Soldiers really, are the foundation of San Angelo. This is where San Angelo comes from as a town. The fort is founded in 1867, and the town builds up around it. So without the fort, you don't have the town of San Angelo. And so, it's absolutely kind of the genesis of the modern town. In a more general way, I think recognizing the Buffalo Soldiers is really important for their contributions to the settlement of the West, as well as just general American history. We, talk a lot, and every February Black History Month comes along, and, local TV stations have a few stories about Black history and so on. And then, February comes and goes, and we don't really talk that much about it for the rest of the year. But, Black history is really American history. I mean, there is no American history without the history of the contributions of African Americans. Before the United States is founded, long before, 100 and almost 150 years, well, even more than 150 years before the founding of the United States, African Americans are here, right? The first African Americans to come into what becomes the United States is in 1619, when the first slaves are brought over by the Dutch and sold at Jamestown. And of course, there's in Texas even an older connection, with the Cabeza de Vaca expedition, which is the first European expedition to explore Texas. One of the survivors, one of the four guys that survives this kind of disastrous expedition, is an African man named Estevanico. So the footprints, the fingerprints of African Americans are all over American history, from before there was an American history, all the way up to the present. And so, recognizing those contributions, honoring, a group like the Buffalo Soldiers that play such an important role is absolutely, overdue, and it's absolutely critical to understanding American history. And in some ways, this shouldn't be that controversial, right? Studying Black history is studying American history. Unfortunately, it's become, especially in recent years, a much more controversial topic, and I think that's undeserving, really. It's kind of a difficult time to be teaching about the history of African Americans and American history in general, because I think some people have been pushing a kind of an agenda that somehow says that learning about African Americans or Native Americans or Mexican Americans is somehow divisive, that somehow we're dredging up all this stuff that is better left alone, and why do we have to know about this, and should people who look like me, should we feel guilty because of what happened 100 150 200 years ago, and so on. And isn't it better to just kind of leave the past where it lies, and so on and so on, right? And I think that's well, I think there's several problems with that. First, I think Americans are better than that. I think Americans are bigger than that. I think Americans are okay, with hearing about things that make us somewhat uncomfortable. I think one of the hallmarks of American society has been open exchange of ideas and a frank discussion about issues. Without that, the United States wouldn't have gotten to where it is. The history of the United States in a lot of ways is a history of struggle, of groups, trying to get the rights that the United States has promised. When Thomas Jefferson writes in the Declaration of Independence, right, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. Well, of course, at the time, right, Jefferson only is talking about, property-owning white men like himself. But as the centuries have gone on, we've been able to expand those rights and that protection to more and more groups. And really, first all property owning white men, but then the next big group is African American men at the end of the Civil War, at least in principle. And in practice, there was certainly a lot of efforts to keep African American men from participating through segregation and voting restrictions and things like that. But at least in theory, right, after the Reconstruction Amendments, the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, African Americans are free and able to vote, men anyway. And then, of course, the next big expansion is the enfranchisement of all women. And then, actually, most people don't know, but in 1924 is the last enfranchisement of some Native Americans that weren't previously allowed to vote. So a big part of American history is trying to have the nation live up to its ideals and to extend those rights to people who had previously been deprived of those rights. And I don't see that and learning about that as a divisive or controversial thing. I think it's absolutely something the nation should be proud of, that we've been able to do that over, a roughly 250-year period. And we've largely done that peacefully, exception of the Civil War. But that's something to be said, right? But I think it's also important to talk about problems that the nation had, right? We can't, you can't talk about American history without talking about slavery, and you need to talk in a very honest way about what slavery was like. One of the things that being a history professor, people always say is, well, isn't history always written by the winners? And generally, I'd say that's true, right? But one of the interesting things is the history of the Civil War, in a lot of ways, was actually written by the losers and the sons of the losers and things like that. So you had a very conscious effort in the 1890s and into the 20th century to kind of revise our understanding of that era, to really sort of, this is where you get the mythology building up around, the Civil War and the Southern cause. And you get groups like, the Daughters of the Confederacy and some of these other groups that build up this mythical view of the war and the causes of the war and all that stuff. And so, a lot of, we're far enough away now, I think, that we can look more critically at that and see how that myth is created, and really recognize, that was not an accurate understanding of the past, and recognize the plight of African Americans after the war. And that brings us back to the Buffalo Soldiers, right? I mean, the Buffalo Soldiers. This is an attractive job for African American men after the war, joining the Army, serving in the Army, and really up until America's entry into World War II, the United States maintains a very small army, and a huge percentage of that army are African American soldiers. And so we really need to understand this history, because we need to understand where it is we have come from, and I think a more accurate, more realistic view of the past. And until we have that, it's hard to really focus on and be able to talk about issues that still affect us today. So I think this is a great project, and it's been something that I personally have been really happy to play a small role in.